I just thought there are two very examples which I can correlate with how we are probably dabbling around with AI. And I think the first thing which he talks about is that both in sports and business, it's about problem solving, right? And which is the first starting point for most of us when we do this. The second he talks about is how are you able to empathize? Empathize, and he, in a way, built a large language model of sorts, what we call as a large language model, by watching the tapes over and over again. So in a way, it was feeding the data, the videos into his model, and then he realized that, okay, this is the way it is happening, right? So how do you empathize, and essentially, how do you perceive everything what is happening around you? So that's the way I am trying to correlate this. How do we deconstruct AI? And I think people have talked about experience for the last about 1.5 to 2 years. Whenever I'm getting into Gen AI or AI-related discussions, there are 3 X's. The event is 3 AI, so I'm quoting 3 X's, which I hear constantly. One is experiment, right? People are experimenting in many ways as to what exactly is happening in Gen AI, what could be the outcome. The second X is exploring, right? We are exploring. We are exploring as to where do we leverage Gen AI, what it can do for us, and how do we reap the benefits. The third thing, and which is most important, which I'm glad that I heard so many times in the morning, is experience, right? And which is what Boris did talk, or Andre Agassi did talk about, right? So as a practitioner, the way I believe, from pivoting it to an enterprise or a GCC perspective, the entire journey from discovery, if I have to call about how he was using the large language model, to value realization, I think it's not so easy. It's not so easy. And I think probably some of you, like me, probably have started using Llama on WhatsApp. I think they unveiled it a couple of weeks back. I think rather than using the browser for ChatGPT, I think somewhere more intuitive and more in your face. So how you essentially deliver a seamless experience. So that's the way I wanted to relate with. And what some of the learnings from the field, which I will talk about in the coming chart, right? The first thing starts with data. In many places, I think the first Gen AI pilot that we were doing was essentially with a client where we wanted to summarize customer complaints in their call center operations. And what we realized is whatever calls that they were actually transcribing, the efficacy of transcription itself was not good. So you need another model to increase that efficacy, right? So how do you get homogeneous data that can be fed into the model to start with? And how do we make it more amenable for feeding the data, yeah? Second, but most important, I think, how do you understand what is the value that you're looking for? Are you solving the problem for experience? Are you solving the problem for productivity? Or are you solving for efficiency? It could be a combination of these three, right? But according to me, I think where people are more looking for is experience as well, right? And the third is what is the accuracy of the model, right? And one example which comes to my mind is when we were using this for screening resumes and using generative AI for that. I think there was some bit of a bias which came in, and the model started deselecting a certain gender of resumes. So how do you ensure that the model is accurate? As GCCs, we tend to use data which is sitting across geographies, right? And working with financial services clients, it's all the more important from a regulatory perspective. I believe 30+ countries have put data and AI regulations in place right now. And how do you essentially move forward from there? So regulatory aspect also becomes important. And I did talk about user experience. Last, but the most important, is the change in the mindset. And I go back to, again, the same example, that despite knowing where he would serve by looking at the tongue, he chose when to use the data, right? So mindset, I'm saying, is when do you want to use GI and what problem? And at the same time, the change in the mindset from, I think Santosh alluded in the beginning, of plus AI to AI plus, that it is always going to be human augmented in the loop wherever we are using generative AI. So last, I think this is a very quick summary of our own journey, what we call ourselves as Client Zero. I think we did talk about IBM being the first GCC, which we set up about 25 years back. And our journey for the last 6 years, it's been longer, and when we are working with clients right now, we want to compress this probably to less than a year. And it started with consolidating data. We consolidated systems across 170 countries for HR, right? And then fed this into and moved on to what we called as automation. It was a chatbot earlier. And today, when we are using as managers and execs, we are using it for compensation, we are using for performance analysis, we are using for transfers, we are using for employment letters, and so on and so forth. But it is very, very intuitive experience. And we've saved about $5 billion over last year, and more than 95% adoption. And extremely, extremely good feedback. I think we can speak about it more. There's a booth. If some of you are interested in HR as a journey, we can talk about it. But that's where I'll pause. And there is a, coming from sports, automotive, and F1 I talked about. There's an Audi video that probably we can talk about as I end this presentation. Yeah? Thank you. Thank you for listening in.